Awesome. And I already forgot to start the recording, so I'm going to do that now. Yep, it does appear to be recording. So this will be recorded. The hope is that we will be able to get this posted online for people to watch afterwards. And I will admit we're in the rears with our last one. It recorded oddly, which is making it a little bit tricky. So as soon as I get them up, I will send an email to everyone that registered and the Pest First Detector list. People can watch the recording. All right, so just a few more people have arrived, which was predictable. Because it is such a big crowd, please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please drop them to the chat and we will try to manage those. For the people that have just arrived, go ahead and put in your name, where you are, and what you're hoping to learn today. I dropped that in again. And let's see, is there anything I've missed? You have to stay until the very end to get your continuing education credits. At the end of the live presentation, we'll drop in a link for CEUs. You can only get CEUs if you stay for the whole live presentation. Sadly, we cannot offer CEUs for the recording. Also, at the end will be an evaluation, and it's really helpful if you go ahead and fill that out for us. So with that, we're going to, I think, pretty quickly turn it over to Brian. So I'm going to stop sharing, Brian, and you can take over the screen.
Okay, thanks, Angie. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names pop into the chat, which is nice. It's a challenge. Oak wilt is a complex issue, and it is a challenge to cover relevant stuff on oak wilt in 1 hour. So I apologize if I don't hit on the topic that you're interested in. Another thing too is that this is called a coffee and chat, so hope you all have your coffee. A chat doesn't imply a lecture, and so Angie, Gary, and Matt, I'm going to lean on you guys to help facilitate that. Obviously, if I say something that doesn't make sense, please ask in the chat, and hopefully we can make it into kind of an informal thing, but it is very difficult in a virtual atmosphere. So we'll all do our best here. Okay, so let's get started here with the presentation. So here we go. Update on oak wilt. I've really enjoyed showing people how awesome oak is recently, because in some realms of Minnesota, perhaps the Minnesota DNR, I don't think we recognize how important oak is. The reason why, I think, is because most of the oak forests are owned on private land. The grand majority, it's like, I think it's over 70% of oak forests are owned privately. It's a keystone ecological genus. I mean, it's so important for wildlife. We have 6 native species in Minnesota. They're all predicted to do better with the climate that is predicted for Minnesota's future. So the oak genus is a winner for Minnesota. And then it's extremely important economically too. It's our #1 hardwood saw timber that's produced in Minnesota. And it's a great firewood and #1 fuel wood export from Minnesota. So it's super important. So here's a quiz. I know some of you have seen this already, but I love to show this. What do you think the 5 most abundant species are in Minnesota that are over 12 inches in diameter at the trunk, right about eye level, 12 inches or larger? What do you think the most abundant species are? Here they are. Quaking aspen is the most abundant species in Minnesota, over 12 inches, followed by bur oak. And you can see that we also have a tremendous number of northern red oaks in the state of Minnesota. What about the 3 most abundant tree species in Minnesota that are over 17 inches in diameter? We have more bur oaks in that category than anything else, quickly followed by quaking aspen and northern red oak. So I like to tell people that, I just think it's intuitive that the bigger the tree is, the more people notice it. And So if that is true, and if big trees are important to society, which I suspect they are, I think there's a lot of science actually to back that up, then Minnesota really is the state of bur oak. So, so just having said that, now we'll move on to oak wilt basics. Just as reminders, oak wilt is not thought to be a native pathogen. It operates like a non-native pathogen. There are several lines of evidence to support this. First, it wasn't confirmed in Minnesota until 1944, right around the metro area. No one's ever shown or found a resistant, mature red oak. And when that's the case, that is strong, strong evidence for a pathogen being not native to where that tree evolved. And then when scientists looked at the genetics of the oak wilt pathogen across a broad area, they saw what's called a bottleneck in the genetic code, which also just strongly suggests that the oak wilt pathogen was introduced into the United States. So it's non-native. Even though oak wilt has been in Minnesota since 1944, it's only impacting 40% of the range of red oak in Minnesota. So all these gray or black zones that you can see on this map of Minnesota indicate where we have basically red oaks. So red oaks being northern pin, northern red, or black oak, the oaks with the very sharp, pointy leaves. So that's where they're at. And here's the range of oak wilt. The red dots are points that we have since, I believe that the 90s, possibly even the late 80s, confirmed oak wilt, where the DNR has a database where we know there has been oak wilt. So not all of these points are oak wilt anymore. I mean, some of these points are from early 2000s, and there's no more oak wilt there because it's been controlled or a variety of reasons. But anyways, the orange, I want you to key in on those orange areas. That orange area is a 20-mile buffer around any confirmed oak wilt. And from my work since 2007, I've found that if an oak forest is within 20 miles of a confirmed oak wilt spot, it's at risk of oak wilt. So this is the high risk area for oak wilt, the orange areas. This map shows the same oak wilt range, obviously, but the gray or black zones are showing where we have bur oaks in the state. And you can see the dense area of bur oak is actually a little bit more north to the northwest of red oaks. And the only reason I'm showing this is to say that oak wilt threatens bur oaks too. I've seen oak wilt create death pockets in pure forest stands of bur oak. Okay, now a little review on oak wilt ID. In May, June, July, August, or early September, oak wilt can start. And the initial symptoms are the leaves kind of turn off green or bronze. So you can see that happening on northern red oak on the left here. See the off green leaves next to the brown leaves. And then on the right here is a bur oak. So this leaf color change starts at the edge of the canopy. It can start on lower branches, but out from the trunk at the edge of the canopy. This is quickly followed by rapid leaf loss. And the leaves that fall, some of them are brown. Like you can see this series of oak wilt symptoms on bur oak leaves here on the right. This was in Pine County. Like they can be totally beige or brown like these two on the right. And then you can have combinations of brown and a little bit of green, or off green and beige, and then sometimes leaves fall that are totally green, like you can see this northern red oak leaf here. It's totally green, totally green. All right, a third symptom is you have rapid mortality in red oaks, and it can happen from the time you notice symptoms until about total tree death or 95% leaf loss. It can happen like 1 to 3 months. It varies, but it's quick. It's a shocking disease. On bur oaks, though, it can kill them. It will kill them almost always. It kills them in a slower way, though. I have seen bur oaks die in 1 year, almost just like red oaks. And then I've also seen them die off slowly. 40% of the time in the fall or the spring after wilt, you will get these fungal pads on wilted trees that grow. And they, they're generally, like, if you remove the bark and look at them, they're like an oblong mound of fungal tissue surrounded by a larger oblong area of spore producing fungal material. And lots of times these fungal pads, they'll crack open the bark, like you can see here on this oak on the right, and then here on the left. And that, what you see there, that's the actual oak wilt pathogen growing right there. And that's how the spores are produced. I took this picture last year in Pine County where the pressure pads were popping out of the bark. You'll see that every so often. It's not super common, but you will see that. And then oak wilt causes these gaps in the forest, these mortality pockets, we call them, over several years. Okay, so those are the symptoms of oak wilt. Honestly though, the best way to look for oak wilt is if you're seeing a ton of leaves on the ground in the summertime. That's a warning that you could be looking at oak wilt. So here are those pictures of leaves that rapidly fell off trees. It's tough in the woods oftentimes to see the rapid leaf drop because of all the understory vegetation. But if you take a look at the understory vegetation and see if leaves are, freshly fallen leaves are suspended up in the understory, that would be the warning sign. So there are several problems on oaks that can confuse a diagnosis of oak wilt. Probably the most common two are two-line chestnut borer and bur oak blight. So here's a side-by-side of bur oak blight on the left and oak wilt on the right. Bur oak blight it has a drastic, it looks bad. It's not so bad though. It gets a lot of attention because it makes trees look very ugly in late summer or early fall when there is a lot of spring precipitation. But honestly, I'm not worried about bur oak blight. That's a whole nother coffee and chat though. The main difference, the way you tell the difference between these two is that bur oak blight starts on the inner canopy and works its way outward, and you get this crown or cap of green leaves. Whereas with oak wilt on a bur oak, it'll start at the edge, it'll kill scattered branches around the crown, and it works its way down. That's the difference. With two-line chestnut borer mimics oak wilt the best, and we are going to see a whole bunch of it here in the next few years. The typical pattern of death caused by two-line chestnut borer is if you're looking at a tree, you might get the outer portion died like last year. What you might be noticing this year is current death, and then the bottom branches are green. So it takes lots of times, it'll take 2 to 3 years for two-line chestnut borer to kill a tree, which is the main difference between it and oak wilt, whereas oak wilt will kill a tree in 1 to 3 months. With oak wilt, you get rapid leaf loss. With two-line chestnut borer, you do not get rapid leaf loss. Oftentimes those dead leaves stick up in the trees. So diagnosing oak wilt, usually, for me anyways, it's not easy because oftentimes when I go out to a site, maybe when you guys go out to the site, the wilt will have happened already. And then you're looking at a tree with no leaves or few leaves, and that's a head scratcher. Another very common situation is you're going to be looking at two-line chestnut borer, like all of the yeah, almost all of these pictures here. This is two-line chestnut borer from flooding. This is two-line chestnut borer. I forget what these two are, but anyways, it's tough. And oftentimes, I think you're going to want to rely on a lab test. And I failed to insert a slide giving you directions on where to go to get directions for a lab test. But I really think for most people, that is the way to go. 2021 was a very bad drought. And when you take a look at similar severe droughts in Minnesota's history, 1976, 1987, 88, 2012, 2013, what happened after those severe droughts was consistent, and you get 2 to 3 years of lots of oaks dying in the state of Minnesota. Here's a picture, an aerial image that one of our surveyors took in 1988 of scattered oak mortality. That's going to happen in 2022 and 2023 and maybe 2024, particularly in central Minnesota and northwestern Minnesota, probably northeastern Minnesota too. And so that's just a very important thing to keep in mind. And again, these were pictures that I took from last year. The picture on the left there, that was in Morrison County. These trees were previously flooded. And so the stress of a prior flood and then a current drought enabled two-line chestnut borer to kill these trees basically in one growing season. But again, take a look at how those leaves were staying up in the canopy. They weren't falling rapidly over the course of 1 to 3 months. This picture on the right was in northern Kennebec County, and you can see that I took this in 2021. So in 2020, the outer crown was dying back, and then in 2021, the midsection of that crown was dying. So that's classic two-line chestnut borer. I expect all of us to see a lot of that in the next few years. All right, what about reporting oak wilt? This is where I'd like you to report oak wilt at. This in the blue circled area. I really am not interested in reports from the metro counties. Oak wilt has been there forever. We're not taking any action. It's up to the individual property owner to manage their own, ornamental trees in those areas. The reason also that there are so many points in the metro areas, it's a relic of a past grant program we had in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So it's a little bit biased for the metro county areas, although there's a tremendous amount of oak wilt there, as I'm sure many of you know. So we like those reports for oak wilt in this blue circled area. How? I'd prefer that you report it with an app on your phone or on a website. So there's a Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, which is shown there. That's a pretty slick way for reporting oak wilt, emerald ash borer, and then a tremendous number of invasive plant species. You also can go to the EDD Maps website and report concerns there. It's really important to take great pictures for oak wilt. Again, the best way for a diagnosis is to submit a sample to the University of Minnesota Plant Disease Clinic. That costs money. I believe it's like $50. But if you take pictures, really great pictures, they'll go to me and I'll look at them. But I'm going to need a picture showing the entire canopy, what that looks like. I want a picture of abundant leaf coverage on the ground underneath that tree. And then I'm going to want a close-up of what the sick leaves look like up in the canopy, like this, or if you see a spore path like this. That's really the only way I can be confident of confirming oak wilt. Otherwise, you'd need a site visit from a really experienced professional or lab confirmation. Going back, I will say that if you're a woodland owner in this blue circled area, and let's say you're in, Cass County or Crow Wing County or Aiken County or even Mille Lacs or Pine County, you can call your local forestry DNR forestry office. And then what will happen is a local DNR forester will go check it out, or they might contact me and I'll try and coordinate a site visit. Okay. Preventing oak wilt. Prevention is so important for oak wilt. So in areas that are high risk, if you simply don't wound oaks from April through July, you will avoid a tremendous amount of oak wilt. You won't avoid all of it because obviously there are windstorms and trees fall and wound other trees and stuff like that, but you'll avoid a lot of oak wilt. And we are just talking pruning here. I've seen damage from oak wilt from a tremendous amount of human activity. You know, like driveway improvements and trucks driving up a driveway, and they might snag a low canopy branch and they rip off the branch. You might get too close to a lawnmower too close to an oak trunk with your lawnmower and you wound it. Any little wound that exposes the wood, it can get infected with oak wilt. For businesses that are hampered by this guideline, we say no wounding of oaks April 1st through July 15th. And there are exceptions there too, for cases where it doesn't make sense. So anyway, but we generally say April through July because that's a simple message for the public to understand. If you go to the Minnesota DNR's oak wilt webpage, I know if you go to University of Minnesota's oak wilt webpage, you'll be able to access this risk map. Now, I will say, if you are, let's say you're a homeowner up in Grand Rapids, or let's say you have a cabin up there, or anywhere outside of this high risk area, I don't know why you would prune an oak anyways in this time frame. That's a completely unnecessary risk. It's so easy to do if you're just doing pruning. Just wait until after July and go. You have all from July through March to prune the trees. You might as well wait until February. February is a fantastic time to prune trees. Actually, early March is too. Okay, just a little bit of the science behind this. I like to show this because people like to take this guidance of no cutting April through July, and then they'll make some policy that says, well, how about no cutting, March through October. And I just like to point out that these bars, the height of the bars, represent how many beetles were trapped that were carrying the oak wilt fungus on them. So you can see that a ton of beetles were carrying the oak wilt fungus around the Twin Cities for a couple of years when they did this research in May and June. May and June, the risk for oak wilt is very high. But I will say that it just doesn't have to do with the number of beetles carrying spores. It also has to do with the trees themselves. There is no research to demonstrate this that I'm aware of, but to my knowledge, there's never been a naturally occurring infection of oak wilt that has occurred after early July in Minnesota. That's never been documented. It's possible in theory, but it's never been documented. The reason why it might not be possible is because the anatomy of the wood actually changes after full leaf elongation. So that's an area of research. Researchers in Wisconsin replicated that Minnesota research like roughly 15 years afterwards. They found the same exact thing throughout most of Wisconsin, that the risk there is a risk that exists from April through early July, but the high risk is in May and June. And you can just look at the lines on this graph. The higher the line, the greater the risk for oak wilt. And you can see after mid-July, it crashes. Okay. And again, here's this risk map. And in very recent occurrences in Minnesota, here's in southeastern Minnesota, somebody was pruning branches along a hunting trail to clear the way. They did this work in May, and they started, I believe, 12 individual pockets of oak wilt. And that's really unfortunate because to control that, we ended up, I think, sacrificing something like 200 oaks that we had to preemptively kill to try and control that oak wilt spread. And that was just because it was pruned in May. That's a very costly mistake. Likewise, in southeastern Pine County here, some people thought they had to do bridge work for some reason, or were staging equipment to do bridge work. They brought in cranes. You can see this crane on the left. They towed these cranes through narrow woods trails. They didn't damage any of the trunks adjacent to the trails, but they dinged all these upper canopy branches, and they started something like 10 oak wilt pockets along 2 miles of woods trail. So again, it's if you're in that risk zone, and if you owned an oak, there's a good chance of getting oak wilt. And again, oak wilt's really expensive to control. That's just the truth of it. So, people complain about preventing it. In many instances, though, it's like, just wait to do your work that you really are itching to do. Wait until August. Wait until February. It's, in many instances, there's no cost to waiting other than people's patience. Okay, just a few messages about controlling oak wilt. Here's a map showing where DNR has cost shared oak wilt control, or I should say not necessarily DNR, but the state of Minnesota or the federal government has cost shared oak wilt control since 2012. The orange X's, those are currently they were controlled, and they're currently being monitored. The green circles are eradicated oak wilt spots that are being monitored. So you can see that our efforts since 2012, the DNR's efforts, have really focused on this edge of oak wilt. I've boxed all these recent control projects. And so I just show this to you to show you that there's a lot of people have put a lot of effort into controlling oak wilt, particularly at the spreading edge of oak wilt. Why the spreading edge? It's because for the state of Minnesota as a whole, that's where we're going to benefit as a whole. Of course, you can control oak wilt on, all kinds of forests that are surrounded by oak wilt, and that might be good for that individual forest, but it's not going to do anything for, the state of Minnesota. I work for the DNR. Our focus is on larger landscape control. Just a few more comments here about controlling oak wilt. There's a lot to know about it, and so I don't suggest any rookie just does it themselves. I've seen a lot of people put a lot of effort into individual oak wilt control projects and fail at them. It's very important to pay close attention to detail when controlling oak wilt, and that is why we wrote this oak wilt guide. It's a detailed guide. It is focused at land managers, not so much individual like homeowners, although that's not to say that individual homeowners can't go through this document and learn a lot about how to control oak wilt. But there was nothing online explaining step-by-step details and explaining the many different options of controlling oak wilt. So we created this. It's on the Minnesota DNR's oak wilt management webpage. So I suggest checking that out if you're interested in controlling oak wilt. So here are kind of the key kind of take-home points about oak wilt management. Just don't avoid wounding. Just don't wound oaks April through July. It's pretty easy to remember. Oak wilt's expensive to control. Most property owners probably are not going to want to invest money in oak wilt control. Therefore, I think the best practice for dealing with oak wilt in like a yard is just wait to cut down the trees that wilted, wait until after November, and then destroy those trees somehow before April. We have suggestions on ways to destroy trees. You can also use those trees if you're a woodworker, cut them up into boards. That gets rid of the risk of oak wilt. There are many different options on dealing with infective oak logs. But again, main message is if you have oak wilt, and you don't have the money or don't have the time or you don't want to control it, the best practice is just to wait to cut down those trees that wilted, wait until like November 15th or afterwards before cutting them down, and then somehow destroy them before April. Like if you hire an arborist, lots of them have chippers. If you just chip the oak, then you've gotten rid of the risk. Underground spread is the main way that oak wilt hurts forests. If you want to control oak wilt, you have to address the underground spread. Just cutting down oaks actually does, for your own property, it essentially does nothing to control oak wilt. If you just cut down dead oaks, it does nothing to control oak wilt. Check out our guidance. If you have questions, look at our webpage. If you're hiring somebody to control oak wilt, I suggest you look at this document before you hire people. Okay, this is the last section here, funding assistance for oak wilt. And I'll start off with the bad news right up front. There's no funding for people to inject oaks to protect them for oak wilt. In a yard situation, that's a good option. And a lot of arborists, a lot of arborists know how to do this, and it's effective to protect individual trees. But there's not going to be any public dollars that will fund that kind of work. If you own like a home in a city, or if you own a home in the country, but it's just like a lot and it doesn't have a forest, there's no funding for oak wilt control for you. An exception is if you are living in kind of the northern half of Morrison County, Cass, Crow Wing County, possibly northwestern Mille Lacs County. There's an option for you. I'll discuss that in a bit here. First, I'm going to talk about DNR Forestry cost share for oak wilt. I know there are some DNR stewardship foresters on this call, so if I misrepresent the program, definitely speak up in the chat. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the program. I suggest if you're a woodland owner, check out the DNR's cost share for woodland owners webpage. It has a lot of information on it. It's a great resource. You just type into Google or whatever, Minnesota DNR Forest Stewardship Cost Share. It'll get you to the webpage. Here are the basics. There are several different control tactics that the Minnesota DNR Division of Forestry can cost share for oak wilt control in forests. And for a single oak wilt control project, we can cost share several different actions. For example, we can cost share like vibratory plowing and like herbicide treatment to stumps to make sure they don't sustain the oak wilt fungus in their root system. Okay, and the kind of the goal of the program is to cover about 50% of what we estimate the cost would be for oak wilt control or any forest improvement activity. With the caveat that for a given project, like for a given oak wilt project, for example, you can't exceed $5,000 per project. There are several other limits and rules with this program, but these are the very basics relevant to oak wilt control. Here is where you would be most likely to be eligible for oak wilt control from the DNR Stewardship Cost Share Program. This is not to say, though, that you couldn't apply for oak wilt control, for example, if you lived in southeastern Minnesota and you owned forest, or even if you lived in Todd, Morrison, Aiken County. But I'll get to this a little bit. This is just, well, I'll get to this. So first of all, something to keep in mind that's important is these funds are limited. It's not like the DNR always has these funds every year. It's totally dependent on the legislature. And it's like we usually go through all the funds. So I believe this for the remainder of this year through June 30th, I'd be really surprised if there'd be any eligible funds. They would start July 1st of 2022. And that the decision to cost share a project is up to the individual DNR stewardship. So our DNR stewardship foresters, they're trying to juggle all kinds of requests for cost share. And so they have to prioritize projects depending on their area. And here are their areas. So first step if you're interested in the cost share program, not only for oak wilt, but all kinds of other forest management activities, is to contact your local cooperative forest management forester or stewardship forester. You can find that map on the website. You describe the issue, you'd probably get a site visit from a DNR forester. The forester would write you a pretty short project plan. You'd sign your life away on this short document. Here's just an example of, payment rate for it. So for example, this is for oak wilt control. And if you had a bunch of big oaks that you needed to cut down to stop oak wilt, it looks like there's 34 trees here. And it looks like it's probably, that must be $30 per tree or something like that. So anyways, you'd sign that. You would do the work yourself, or you'd hire it out. You'd probably submit the receipts. The DNR would inspect the job to make sure you did it according to the project plan, and then you'd get your money deposited. Okay, so that's the DNR cost share program. It's actually the bee's knees, to tell you the truth. When you take a look at a lot of other cost share programs across this country, Minnesota DNR stewardship program is pretty awesome. Then there's the Morrison County Soil and Water Conservation District grant for oak wilt control. SWCD, again, that's Soil and Water Conservation District. I suggest going to their website just to check it out. Just type in Morrison Soil and Water Conservation District and oak wilt. They have a little web page on it. But here are the basics for that program. So Morrison County, SWCD, they put out, they'll put out, I forget what, a project proposal, and they'll solicit bids from arborists, basically, or loggers, or whoever wants to bid on it. The winning bidder, then, it will be the single business that will deal with all the landowners enrolled in the program. And in general, this grant covers the full cost of controlling oak wilt. But the caveat here is that the sites are prioritized by the Soil and Water Conservation District. The DNR gets input too, and so it's not like everyone who applies to this program is going to get funded. The goal is to stop oak wilt spread right here in this circled area, and this is where the grant is focused. So if you're a property owner dealing with oak wilt in this area, basically call Morrison County Soil and Water Conservation District, or call the Minnesota DNR Forestry Office in Little Falls. They got a grant, the Soil and Water Conservation District got a large grant from the Minnesota legislature to stop oak wilt here. So again, you just contact them. You probably get a site inspection from one of them, or maybe a DNR forester. You'd sign a landowner agreement. The contractor would do the work. And when they're done with all landowners enrolled in the program, then they get reimbursement from the SWCD. So that's how that program works. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, they also have a few programs that can fund several different types of natural resources work. I don't know a lot about it, but bottom line is contact your local office. They'll do a walkthrough, they might discuss your options, then you apply for the relevant program and keep your fingers crossed for funding. So, last slide. Considerations. If you're a property, like a homeowner in a city, in a bigger city in Minnesota, check your community forestry's website. There's a chance that they might have some funding available for you, or maybe if you have oak wilt in your front yard against the street, maybe they could take care of that if they actually have kind of authority over that tree, like if it's within so many feet of the center line of the tree. So basically, if you're in a city, check your community forestry website. Also, some communities have deals with arborist companies where they might get better deals on tree injection rates for their community members. If you're in a rural lot and it's just a rural lot, there's no forest, it's your piece of heaven out in the country, you have ornamental trees everywhere. This is a rough spot to be in if you have oak wilt. There's no funding available for you, with the exception of that grant that Morrison County SWC has. So yeah, that's all I have. Hopefully we have 10 minutes for discussion.
Yeah, you did great, Brian. Sorry, I was busy trying to organize the questions. So we had a lot of good questions come in. And so I've lumped a few of them. If you have more questions, of course, please drop it into the chat. We are trying to organize those and queue them up for Brian. So a couple themes have emerged. One is spread and equipment, and another one is herbicide. So I'm going to start with those. So there's been a little bit of chatter about spread and equipment. And so one question was, what about the risk of spread by contaminated equipment? And then there were some comments about tree spikes being really great inoculation points. So I think don't use tree spikes during that high risk season. And then there was another comment about the spread of fungus on metal has not been shown to be a concern. And so do you have thoughts about those things?
Yes. So in terms of oak wilt spread on any kind of equipment, there's no risk. There's no evidence. There's never been any demonstrated evidence for spread on equipment. And when you take a look at the disease biology, it's just kind of like, I don't know how it would even happen. In theory, anything is possible. Like in theory, the earth could implode tomorrow, but it's just like it's not a concern.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So what about those? I hadn't heard about the tree spikes. Is that a likely infection hole? Even if they don't move on the spikes themselves, is the hole a potential problem?
I'm not really tremendously familiar with tree spikes. I mean, I know there's like iron and manganese spikes to deal with yellowing foliage on trees. There's, I think, spikes that you can put into roots in the soil, or just soil spikes. There's
okay, I think, let me be clear. I think these were tree climbing spikes. So like on shoots.
Oh,
sorry. Oh,
thanks for specifying.
Yeah.
Never use tree climbing spikes.
Okay.
Tree climbing spikes were the source of oak wilt for the first time in Oneida County, Wisconsin, when I worked for Wisconsin DNR. Yeah, I mean, again, like for any work on an oak, you do not want to damage, you don't want to expose the sapwood above ground. You don't want to expose the sapwood April through July. April through mid-July. If you're an arborist, you could definitely start work in July 15th. And of course, there are exceptions. One exception is if you have to prune an oak. I've run into situations where homeowners, they have to prune an oak because their homeowner insurance company says you must get rid of this branch. It's a hazard to your home. If you don't, we're going to drop you. In that instance, you can prune if you cover the wound ASAP with a a tree wound dressing or like a shellac type paint, you've eliminated the risk of oak wilt. Paints are from work that was done in the 70s and 80s in Minnesota. The paints that they used at that time were 100% effective, and they tested all kinds of wounds. And so if you have to wound a tree, you know, some like power line clearing companies, apparently they have to do their work at this time of year. If they paint those wounds immediately, there's no risk. The insect vectors, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, that was great. Perfect. So then I'm going to jump to herbicide. There's been a fair bit of chatter about this. So one comment was that one oak wilt says even dead tree roots killed trees that were killed with Roundup can transfer spores to adjacent trees. Is that true? Is the question. And then I'll let you do that one first.
Okay, so roots, this is getting a little bit into the disease biology details, but roots can't produce spores, but they certainly can transfer oak wilt. And so if you kill an oak tree with herbicides in any way, part of the root system is going to stay alive. They actually did some research in the 90s, I believe, where they assessed how long oak roots stayed alive after those oaks were killed with herbicides in a variety of ways. And they found that those roots stayed alive past 5 years. Not all the roots, some of the roots were killed, but they stayed alive. I actually, at the Minnesota Shade Tree Short Course several years ago, there was a professor speaking from Ohio State University. She was an herbicide expert, specifically of woody plants. And I asked her, you know, how would you kill the root system of a mature oak? Is that possible? And she basically said, no, that's not possible. A root system on an oak tree is so huge that it's essentially impossible. But some of the roots will die. And the other thing too is when you apply an herbicide to a tree with all of the legal ways to do so, the movement of things in the trunk basically goes up. There are very few herbicides that would be taken down into the roots. Some will, but not for a very long ways.
Okay, so I think you did a great job answering that question. I think you answered the question about collateral damage in the roots because the herbicide by and large doesn't go down. So well done there. Yeah.
Point of clarification. I forgot to really address the original question directly though. Yes, it's possible. If you kill an oak with Roundup and that oak had oak wilt, the question was, or the observation was, oak wilt spread from that Roundup killed oak to surrounding oaks. Yes, that's totally possible.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for just making that even more clear. So let's see, there was a great question very early on about the difference between oak wilt and drought symptoms, and that seems like a good one given that we still are in a drought.
Very challenging to distinguish oak wilt from extreme drought symptoms. Last year in central Minnesota, actually in Carver County too, on bur oaks, they looked exactly like oak wilt. I mean, there are slight variations, but too complicated to describe in a short answer. The key there to distinguish extreme drought symptoms from oak wilt was that the symptoms on the oaks appeared suddenly across a vast geographic area. And so when that happens on any tree, any symptom that shows up simultaneously, basically across the landscape, that's almost always caused by the environment.
Excellent, thank you. So there was a good question a little bit earlier about prescribed fire. Do you know how prescribed fire impacts oak wilt? For example, would you suggest burning it in the fall instead of spring to potentially decrease oak damage?
This is an area of research. This question comes up every oak wilt talk I give. It's a very important question. No one is doing the research. I have had land managers who are experienced with a lot of prescribed burns, and they are convinced that prescribed burning can start oak wilt if done in the spring. I've seen situations where it seems like, that it seems like spring burns can promote oak wilt. Pulling off a fall prescribed burn, from my understanding, is extremely difficult logistically, but I would suggest a best practice of, if you're doing prescribed burns in oak forests and you can do it in the fall, you should do it in the fall.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's see. You're doing a great job getting to these. So here's another question that's a little bit tree biology. So just a clarification, I think. Can't cutting down an oak tree during the period, the no wound period, still risk oak spread? The sap beetles can still infect the stump and then transfer it. Got any thoughts about that?
Yes, oak wilt can start on a stump. It's been observed before. I've not observed it, but that is a risk. Again, the way to, this would be an exception to that April through July. That I think it's a reasonable exception to the April through July no cut period. If you're, for example, if you're doing lot clearing and you got to cut down a bunch of oaks to make way for a house foundation, and those root systems are going to be grubbed out, that's essentially, there's no risk for oak wilt there. Even though they might get infected, you're going to grub out the root systems. You're going to just obliterate the whole site, with the exception of like the periphery of the lot. With the periphery of the lot, if you want to be really careful, you could simply paint the periphery of the cut stump surface with a shellac, with a tree wound dressing, probably just with a water-based paint, and you're going to be eliminating the risk of that stump getting infected. So yes, it's possible.
All right, excellent. Trying to keep up here. So here's an interesting question. So this is a kind of a hypothetical. How about if a neighbor has oak wilt in his woods, or if you have a patch in your own lot, would cutting a line of my oaks near the lot line and treating the stumps with garland prevent grafting? Do red oaks and white oaks share grafting? Does cutting oaks without treatment stop spread?
Okay, so cutting oaks without treatment doesn't stop spread. You have to address the underground factor. Most of the oaks that die from oak wilt in the upper Midwest, like actually 90% of oak mortality from oak wilt in the upper Midwest occurs from underground spread. So there are situations where, if, for example, if you have an oak, if you have a couple oaks that have oak wilt, and there are no oaks within like 200 feet of those oaks, there's not going to be any underground spread. But if you have two oaks that died of oak wilt, and there are, if there are a few oaks that are within like 50 feet of those true trees, you're going to have underground spread. Another question there was, do red oaks graft with white oaks? They do sometimes, yes. The research, it's kind of older research, and it was done in the central sands of Wisconsin, like Adams, Juneau County area. It showed that 4% of the time, bur oak graft to northern pin oak. From my work in Minnesota, I think that it's higher. I would guess maybe 10% of the time where you have mixed oak species growing together, where bur oaks are growing next to northern pins or northern red oaks. I'd say 10% of the time you get oak wilt transfer from the red oaks to the bur oak. And then the original question there, I forget, Angie, sorry.
No, I think you got it.
Oh, the lot line, cutting the lot line.
Yeah, cutting the lot line.
I'd say with the time we have remaining, read our oak wilt management guide. There's a way to do that. You have to sacrifice a lot of healthy oaks to accomplish the goal. And this is kind of going back to the question where the question I think there was a question about using herbicides, Roundup, that kind of discussion. So the thing is, there has been research done looking at how long the root system of an oak will survive after herbicide application. But no one's ever looked at, in a research setting, what's the likelihood of success of oak wilt control using these herbicide methods. There's a lot of evidence from certain entities in Wisconsin, and also some of our research, like our kind of practical research trials, I would say, that if done right, you can stop oak wilt with herbicides, but it's got to be done right. And so basically, in a nutshell, you have to sacrifice a lot of oaks, way more, like more than if you're using a vibratory plow. So with the lot line, if your neighbor has oak wilt, is there a way to stop oak wilt at the lot line? Yes. I would recommend utilizing a company with a vibratory plow or a trencher, though.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to just point out to everyone that my colleague Matt Russell has been dropping in both of the CEU credit link, which you need to fill out now if you want to get CEU credits. We can only offer it at the end of the live presentation, so that is now. He also dropped in the evaluation, and we of course are very grateful for that. So we have a couple questions, but I think we will end promptly at 10, just for everyone's. There is a question that's fairly specific. I suspect you can pitch everyone to the guide online, but what is the typical parameter that you consider for oak wilt transmission to adjust to adjacent oaks, 50, 100 feet or more?
The parameter of control depends on the control technique you're using. And it also depends on the size of the trees, depends on the soils, and it depends on how long oak wilt has been there. So if you're using a vibratory plow or even a trencher to stop oak wilt, and the oak wilt pocket has been there for like 1 or 2 years, probably 60 feet, maybe even less if the soils aren't pure sands. But if you're using like a frill girdle and then an herbicide technique to sacrifice a bunch of healthy oaks around the disease pocket to stop oak wilt, and let's say oak wilt has been at that site for 5 years, you're looking at probably 100 feet is very reasonable to be looking at.
Okay, so there are maybe 2 more questions. I'll say them quickly and maybe you can answer them quickly. If I dig a utility trench and damage an oak root, is that an issue? That's one.
If you dig a utility trench and damage an oak root, that if you fill that trench, okay, I don't know. In theory, yes. An example I can think of is a longtime oak wilt researcher has observed that oak wilt can start in road cuts. Like if a road cut was made and it damages a bunch of oaks roots and they're exposed, those roots apparently can get infected with oak wilt. So in theory, yes. Yeah, with trenching work, I mean, if you fill that trench, the quicker you fill that trench, the less likely you're going to get oak wilt infection.
Okay. Well, I think we'll maybe close there. There are a couple more questions, but is it okay if these few questions, there's only 3 left, I think, from Gabe, John, and Scott, if they email you directly, is that acceptable?
They sure can do that, yep.
Excellent. So Brian Schwingle at the DNR. And so with that, yeah, okay. So I'm getting a note personally.
I'll pop my
remaining questions and send them.
The chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think that was what I was being asked to do. So with that, I just want to say thank you, everyone. This is a final reminder that we will have this recorded. It is recorded. We will try to get that posted online. I will send an email to everyone. If you want CEU credits, you have to get them now. We cannot offer them later. And then, of course, evaluation. We are always grateful for that. And our next Forest Pest First Detector coffee and chat, I have a slide, but I'm not going to show it, is jumping worms with a focus on forests. And that will be Tuesday, April 12th from 9 to 10. And I will be the speaker. So hope you have to register for each of these individually. That will be the last one. So if you want to hear about jumping worms in forest, you need to make sure to register for that specifically. All right, with that, it is now 10:01 and I will close out this webinar. So thank you, everybody. Brian, a special shout out to you. You were great. Thanks,
you.
everybody, for hanging with us.
Bye.
Bye. All right.
Thanks, Andy. Great job.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll see you at the Invasive
Yep.
Species Community Practice next.
week.
All right.
After
See you
break.
later.
Hey, Ange.
Yes.
So I asked if you could send a list of the questions because I think we could really base some outreach on those questions.
Yeah, I
actually.
got them all. So I'm going to put them in an email to you,
Sweet.
Brian, straight away. Yep. No,
Thank
thanks. It was.
you.
I saw that note. Great. Thanks, Val, for all
Thanks.
that work.
Thanks for having the topic. Perfect.
Yep. Talk to you guys later.